Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show for May 27th, 2021. Uh, Sharon Harding, our normal host, is out this week, so I'm taking over for this week. I'm Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, Avram Pellich, joined by Deputy Managing Editor Paul Alcorn, and our very special guest, Jonmichael Hands of the Chia Foundation. Jonmichael, it's wonderful to have you on. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do for the Chia Foundation and how you got started with them?
Yeah, so many of you guys know me because I've been in the SSD space for a long time. I managed the Intel data center SSD product line for the last 6 years. I worked at Intel on data center SSDs for the last 10 years. So I actually joined Chia about 3 weeks ago as the head of storage and so mainly working with a lot of the storage vendors on Chia plotting and farming. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Chia, there's Chia, the protocol, which is this decentralized protocol that's based on this thing called proof of space and time, which is the idea is using your extra underutilized hard drive space as a way to secure the blockchain instead of wasteful kind of proof of work. And obviously, this has exploded. There's been a ton of interest in the last 2 months. The network's grown from about 120 petabytes to now over, I think, 14 exabytes as of today. What are we at? 527. So clearly, there's a huge interest in this cryptocurrency. And so Chia, the protocol, is kind of this open source, decentralized cryptocurrency. And then Chia Network, the company behind it, is going to be building stuff on top of that. So obviously, the company has the engineers working on Chia, the protocol, but they're also working on stuff like Chia Lisp, which is a smart contract in on-chain programming language. We're working with large organizations to implement Chia cryptocurrency into their businesses, and the actual company plans to go public later this year. So what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is talking to all the storage vendors, which is awesome, about how to create unique products for Chia farming and plotting. They want to know what the hell's going on with the market. Is this a long-term thing? Is it a kind of ephemeral thing? As far as Chia plotting and farming, and mostly just really curious and interested about what this whole thing is. So it's been fun trying to kind of give people the overview of like what Chia is.
So, for those who are not as familiar with Chia as and haven't read all of our articles about it, which you should, um, how would you describe Chia to someone who's not familiar with it?
Well, especially for like technology enthusiasts, yeah, this is kind of the fun part of Chia is by making the protocol actually secured by proof of space, which is like just storing files in your hard drive. It's very accessible for people to actually run a full copy of the full blockchain software, full node software on the computer. You basically just download the application, install it, and really the barrier of entry is like nothing. You just need a desktop, you plug in an extra SSD and an extra hard drive, and you're off. And so the process of farming is basically you have these plot files that sit on your hard drive, and periodically the network sends challenges, and then you check your plot file to say, do I have a valid proof to the challenge? Think of plot files like bingo cards, and when you do find a proof, you respond back to the network and say, I found a proof, and you get rewarded with 2 Chia. That's the reward right now. And, as of today, I think Chia is about $800. So that's a very profitable thing. And people found out very quickly that you can make money by just taking your underutilized hard drive space and allocating it to the network. Now, the interesting thing about Chia, the plotting, is so to make that lookup on that final 100 gigabyte plot file, and you can have files that are bigger. This is determined by this thing called a K value, which is like basically there's 2 to the K entries in each table, and then there's multiple tables on these plot files. And a typical plot file today is about 100 gigabytes in size. And to make that 100 gigabyte file, you actually have to write a bunch of data out. And today it's about 256 gigabytes of data. You have to sort that data, and then you have to compress that data. And that is very compute intensive, it's very IO intensive, and it's very DRAM heavy and memory bandwidth intensive. So it's a very cool computational problem because it really stress tests like PCs. Everything matters: core frequency, number of cores, DRAM bandwidth, SSDs. Typically on SSDs, this is a pretty write intensive workload. So I spent a lot of time in the last couple of months talking about SSD endurance and advocating, people understand some of the metrics that SSD vendors use to talk about endurance, like terabytes written and drive writes per day, and kind of where those come from and how to actually monitor and analyze the endurance of SSDs. So this plotting process is really fun because you're trying to generate the most amount of plots per day per system. And so you have these two kind of unique things. You're spending money, if you're a Chia farmer, you're spending money on plotting hardware, which looks a lot just like a desktop PC with like a high-end enterprise SSD, or it can look like a server or some really high-end desktops with many cores. And then you're spending money on farming hardware, which is just a bunch of hard drives. And then you quickly figure out, okay, this problem is about storing the most amount of data in the smallest amount of space for the least amount of money and the least amount of power. And this is really cool because hard drives, as a typical desktop hard drive, 5400 RPM hard drive consumes, let's say, 3 to 4 watts idle. Compare this to like an Ethereum mining or something where you have a graphics card that's 300 to 500 watts per graphics card. So you're just an order of magnitude different in power utilization. So the idea of this is that by changing from proof of work to proof of space, you can make a much more energy efficient protocol that is much more decentralized than proof of work, because proof of work tends to gravitate toward these large miners that have a bunch of dedicated hardware and dedicated capex for this mining equipment, and they run them in data centers where in Bitcoin or Ethereum, a large percentage of the actual spend for mining is power consumption. And in Chia, it's totally different. It's just farming hardware. And so you're spending the majority of the money to farm. Chia is actually spent on the hard drives and the farming hardware themselves. And so this is very unique in that, we think we've done a very good job at like actually making a protocol that's going to be incentivized, much less power consumption than proof of work does.
So obviously, this is a new currency, and we don't yet have group plotting like we do with group mining. Is this something where people are going to be able to? It seems like the odds are getting a little bit more difficult as it grows. Is this something where it's worth it for individuals to get involved? How many plots do you need to have for it to matter?
Sure. Yeah. In the beginning of the network, when the network was very small, you could have even just a few hard drives and you'd be getting daily rewards or a reward every other day. Now that number is a large number of terabytes, hundreds of terabytes, to where you're getting like daily rewards. And so one of the things, the network grew much faster than any of us anticipated. And by the way, we all had side bets on how fast the network would grow, and Chia has become a success far, far faster than anybody had even. I had all these models on how fast the network would grow. Basically, we're at the point where Chia today at 14 exabytes has consumed more than 1% of the global hard drive market for 2021. And I thought there's no way that Chia, brand new cryptocurrency, in the first year will get to 1% of the global hard drive market. And boy, I was wrong. And so we're stress testing in real time how much storage is actually out there that is underutilized. And that was kind of the whole theory of Chia cryptocurrency, is that like, look, instead of mining where you have to buy dedicated hardware, what if there's already hardware out there that can secure the blockchain? And we're actually testing this hypothesis in real time to figure out how much storage actually is out there. So there's something in Chia that's called pools, and this is not dissimilar from like pooling in Ethereum or Bitcoin, where people join together, smaller guys join together to form a bigger pool, and then they farm or mine on the network. In Chia, the way that they're going to implement it is actually pooling protocol built into the actual protocol itself. And so people can run pools using the reference code that Chia provides, and little guys can go team together. And then, but the interesting part about pooling in Chia is that the farmers actually make the blocks, and then they'll send the rewards to the pool, and then the pool will distribute those rewards to all the people in the pool. This is very, very different than how it works in Bitcoin or Ethereum and any other proof of work cryptocurrency, because you are not susceptible to a 51% attack. In Bitcoin today, if a bunch of the large pools got together and made a handshake, they could actually get together and very easily do a large 51% attack on the network. Now, they wouldn't do that because that would undermine the entire value of Bitcoin, and they all have lots of Bitcoin, so that would make any economic sense. But in Chia, it literally makes this impossible. So they've designed it to be a much more decentralized cryptocurrency. But pooling is going to be great, because once they implement pooling, and I know that we had all this stuff on the roadmap for Chia, and unfortunately it's been accelerated because the net space is growing so fast. There was all kinds of things that we were going to work on, like the smart programming language and Chia Lisp and other things that are being worked on. But the pooling protocol has taken number one priority as far as like the Chia roadmap. So they are trying to get a reference code out by literally next week, to where people can actually go implement this software. And so pooling will be awesome because somebody can take one hard drive and one desktop and then join a pool. And the way that they've implemented pools, it allows you to actually make a very small smart transaction on the network and actually change pools every 30 minutes. And then pools can do payouts once a day, once a week. And so if you just have one or two hard drives, you can still make a couple bucks a day or $10 a day or whatever it's going to be. And the cool thing is you can calculate exactly your expected value. You can just say, how much capacity do I have and how much is out there in the network? And you can say, this is my estimated daily rewards, and you'll get paid out in the pool exactly what your estimated expected value is.
Wow, that's That's great. So we have a couple questions. Douglas says, would love to hear what steps you are taking towards software assurance. I'd not want an agent that can walk my hard drive. I don't know what exactly he means, walk my hard drive stealing data. Will you assure us we're downloading safe software?
Yeah, there's no user data in Chia. And if you were downloading software for Chia, please, please, please do not download it anywhere besides the Chia.net, place repository, because there's lots of software that's popped up for improving the automation for plotting and farming and stuff like that. And unless you're on GitHub reading this code, like, don't download that on a computer that has your private keys on it. Please don't do that. Like, we are actually going to do a webcast on security and keys in Chia tomorrow, a public Zoom that we're going to record and put on our YouTube. But we're getting a ton of really basic questions about security on Chia. One is because we did a survey for pools, and out of the 5,000 respondents that responded for the interest in Chia pools, 60% of them, Chia was their first cryptocurrency ever. Not first like mining or farming cryptocurrency, but like their first introduction to any cryptocurrency ever. So a lot of these people don't understand basic tenets of core key management, which is, put your private keys on a system that has full disk encryption. You write down your copy of your seed and you put that in a safe deposit box or a bank or somewhere very safe. And you generally don't want your private keys or seed word on any computer that has access to the internet or like on a regular basis, especially when you're having software like Remote Desktop or TeamViewer or anything like that. So yeah, anyway, so the Chia software is all open source. And if you want to look at the code, it's all up there on GitHub, and you can make sure that there's not doing anything nefarious. So.
Gabriel asks, what are the main features in an SSD that makes an SSD better than the other besides endurance? I think they mean better for Chia farming rather than just better in general.
Hmm. Yeah, so SSDs today in Chia are used for the plotting process, which is the actual creation of the cryptographic data and these plot files that will be stored on the hard drives later for farming. And today people are using SSDs to get a competitive advantage to plot faster. And so typically the way I've described this, we have lots of material written up about this, is these like small capacity consumer SSDs that don't have very many NAND die on them, because as NAND flash has become cheaper and the 3D layer count has gone up on all the vendors, the average die capacity has gone up, and so making smaller capacity drives has become increasingly challenging. And the way they got around this performance problem was to implement these SLC caches, which made bursty performance very good in a consumer application. So if you're on a desktop and you're doing gaming or light web browsing and stuff, like, you're 99% read. You write your applications once and then you're reading data all the time. And even very cheap QLC is very good at reading. And so these consumer SSDs are really optimized for bursty workloads. In Chia, you're writing a lot of sustained writes to the drive when you're doing this plotting process. It's writing typically 24/7. For each 100 gigabyte file today, and this might change in future versions of the software, you're writing about 1.3 terabytes of writes for every 100 gigabyte file made. And you may, on an 8-core machine, be doing 8 of these in parallel on your 2 terabyte drive. And so that is a lot of writes, far more writes than an SSD that is consumer SSD is made to withstand. So data center SSDs are meant, for large, high bandwidth sustained writes that have meant for high endurance and high TBW and drive writes per day. So really, they're a better fit for Chia plotting. And people have it's been cool to see people using data center hardware in the consumer space with these like U.2 adapters and add-in card adapters and hardware cards to attach the drives. I've been doing this stuff for a very long time because I've worked on data center SSDs and had fun playing on desktops. But for an SSD specifically, there's 2 attributes. One, I think the plotting process, no question about it, it is a write-intensive workload. You want a drive that has a high TBW rating. We have a wiki at chia.net on the GitHub pages that show you exactly for each model drive how many plots you can write to the drive before it wears out. Like, a very, very clear guidance of like, these are the drives to use, these are the ones to stay away from. And 2, the sustained write bandwidth is very important because you're writing so much data that you're often going to be at this point where the drives are way past the caching algorithms and you're going to be writing sustained amount of data. And so you want high bandwidth sustained writes. And that's really going to be, because all drives are pretty good at reading. And so the write is the really one that's really hard to do right on a drive because it's dictated by the size and capacity of the drive. And I mentioned that. So one, you want NVMe drives because NVMe is the fastest interface for data center and consumer SSDs. And I think that debate is dead. there was lots of people that were trying to argue with me about, in consumer workloads that, SATA was just as fine as NVMe, and in plotting, it's great that's clearly not the case. It's a very I/O intensive and bandwidth intensive workload, and the NVMe protocol and bandwidth of PCI Express provides a tremendous amount of value. So NVMe drives, you want high capacities like 2 and 4 terabytes. You kind of match the capacity with the core count. So if you're doing like an 8-core system, you'd want like a 2 terabyte drive. If you had a 16-core system, you want maybe two 2 terabyte drives or a 4 terabyte drive. Ideally, you'd want an enterprise drive that has high TBW. So,
yeah, that's something that I've noticed and that I've read kind of around this, is that a lot of people who essentially don't know storage. So, you mentioned some of these people, a lot of these people are new and they don't really know Bitcoin at all. But even if they knew Bitcoin, that's not going to help the majority of these folks who don't know anything about SSDs. So, people are reporting that they're burning up their SSDs when they do this. Can they do things like over provisioning, where you use extra spare space? Like if you don't use all of the drive, it typically lasts longer. If you leave like a spare area.
The answer is it depends. So on older drives, like if people are buying models on eBay that are like 10 years old, or even like 6 or 7 years old, over provisioning may be a really good choice, because some of these older drives don't handle the trim command very well. So basically, in the plotting process, this plotting software, it's just some basic C++ code that writes these temporary files, and then you're basically doing these bucket sorts where you're kind of sorting the data around. And when it makes these temporary files, then the operating system deletes them, and then what happens to the SSD is the SSD gets sent a trim command for the LBAs associated with that file. Now, if you have an operating system with trim set up correctly, the write amplification factor of the Chia workload will be like, we'll say 1.2 to 1.5. And so over provisioning, the only goal of over provisioning is to reduce the write amp factor. You're basically giving the SSD more spare area for garbage collection efficiency. And if the SSD already has a very efficient garbage collection because it's getting trimmed very often, then you don't need over provisioning. And so older drives that don't handle trim very well, or were implemented at a time before trim was very mainstream, people are using these like 7 or 8 year old SATA drives that like, some of the new Ubuntu kernels don't like, as far as trim. And so that might be an interesting option, but like for the most part, you don't have to. So by the way, that's generally a good practice. Like when drives are full, they perform, much worse on writes. This is just a fact of SSDs, because you have less spare area for garbage collection. But in the Chia workload, the data is turning over so frequently that it's not going to help too much.
Now, with that also, Endurance, when they spec it, they do it by JEDEC rules, and they spec it for a full random workload over the full span of the drive. It's the worst conditions that you could possibly give an SSD, is a random workload over the full span of the drive. When Chia writes and it does this plot creation, is that random or is that like sequential?
Sequential. It's sequential with one plot process, but when you go now throw 8 or 12 or 14 plotting processes at single drive, then you have these multiple threads that are writing sequential writes, and it looks more random to the drive. Now, the good thing that I mentioned, which is the TBW spec'd on, there was some confusion online about how this is specified. Like every single vendor should be specifying TBW to the JESD 219 specification from JEDEC. And that is how vendors actually rate their SSD endurance. And it's a very specific workload that JEDEC defines. You have a very specific amount of the drive that is full, and they run this very specific workload that they rate the TBW in. Now, your TBW in a Chia plotting workload, if you have trim and all these things implemented correctly, maybe 2 to 3 times more than what the TBW on the spec sheet is. Now, what I've found out in many late nights looking at the plotting channel and Chia, and people sending me screenshots of their smart attributes, is that the large vendors like Intel and Samsung and other guys generally do the smart accurately and correctly, which is reporting the smart percentage used for NVMe, which is kind of like your gas gauge of like how much endurance you have left. They report that based on NAND program erase cycles and actual endurance. And some of these lower end consumer models that are like using the stock firmware from these controller guys are not reporting this correctly. They're just reporting percentage used off host writes, and this is not the right way to calculate endurance. And so people are finding, they're like, oh my God, I was able to write way more than 100% of my percent used on this whatever random no-name drive. And I'm like, sure, I bet you could. And that if you are writing data and you're not seeing available spares go down, you're not seeing IO errors, and you're not seeing uncorrectables, keep writing. Like, go ahead. Like, this is not, there's no problem with that. But I wish and I hope that Chia is a impetus to SSD vendors to actually start doing this correctly. By the way, the people that make the companies that make data center SSDs and also make consumer SSDs would never screw this up.
Yeah.
You cannot screw this up in the data center. Like, you have to basically know exactly what the endurance of your drive is. And walking back, for those that might not be familiar with all the terms I'm slinging, endurance is the right terminology for basically the amount of writes you can write to a SSD before the drive wears out. And a drive wearing out just means it stops working, or stops. Getting lots of uncorrectable data or uncorrectable bit errors when you start writing the data. And so this is not a new phenomena, and enterprise SSDs have been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah, and on the consumer side, consumer SSDs, we're seeing a lot of cases where even the types of NAND that are used in the SSD can change, and sometimes the spec sheets don't, or it's not listed on the package. It just says NAND. So yeah, that could create a bit of problem with consumer SSDs.
Yeah, and I hope that so one is, if you are an SSD vendor of one of these companies and you're watching this, like, please reach out to me. I manage storage at Chia, and I ran the data center SSD business at Intel for a very long time, and I know how this works, and I can tell you exactly what to do for Chia, exactly how you should implement the drive, and I can tell you exactly what drive to build that is optimal for Chia plotting. So please reach out to me and do that. For now, it's pretty hard to find consumer M.2 80mm drives that have like a super high TBW rating. You find some with like 5,000 or 7,000 per array cycle NAND, but they're kind of these unicorn drives that there's only a few models that have it. So yeah, I hope that if people are starting to think about that soon, because making an SSD that can plot for years without wearing out in Chia is not only possible, they exist, and they're being used today. They're just called data center SSDs, and I hope that there'll be some higher end consumer models that have that same behavior.
So Valentino asks, I don't know if we can answer this, but what is the chance to win Chia if you're plotting 20 terabytes?
Yeah, so it's kind of the wrong question to be asking, but there's two ways to ask this question. One is if I have, whoops, as I knocked my headphone out. So one is to ask the question of like, okay, if I have X amount of capacity, what is my probability of winning? This is very easy. We have a calculator, and I can send you guys a link that is just, it follows a binomial or Poisson distribution, which is just, you take your capacity of storage, you divide it by the net space, and that's your probability of winning. And then you have 4,608 chances a day to win. That's it. There's no fancy math. Like, it follows a normal distribution of winning. And so you can do the math there with 20 terabytes. And the question that you should be asking is not what's my probability to win, is what's my expected value. And if I have X capacity, what is my expected, how many days until the probability of winning zero goes above 0%? And it's people are asking it kind of the wrong question, right? It's a probability distribution. Now, pooling will fix this. Once pooling is implemented, you don't care about that random distribution. The variance goes away, and you just say, what's my expected value? There's a website called chiacalculator.com. It's a very good website. You just plug in your number of terabytes, and it tells you exactly what your expected value is and how many Chia you're going to earn per day. And remember, one Chia can be broken up into a trillion. God, it's weird saying that. 1 trillion mojos. Mojos is kind of like the Satoshis to Bitcoin. Mojos is to Chia, and so you can get a fraction of a Chia, and you'll get distributions every day or every week, whatever, when you're in a pool. So that's the better way to think about it, is if I have X capacity, what's my expected value and expected earnings per day, not necessarily like how long it's going to take me to win. And the answer to that question right now with 20 terabytes is a very long time, unfortunately.
So Paul and I have been debating for a while. What is what can you, once you've already plotted, what is the slowest or cheapest storage that you can put an existing plot on? Obviously, we've seen people recommend external USB hard drives. Like, what about a tape drive? And what about a tape backup? Like, what can you do?
What about a tape drive?
Yeah, so there's some knobs in the protocol that were tuned specifically to kind of like adjust for the storage media that we know of today. And so without going into too much gory detail, there's a thing called a signage point. So in Chia is actually this thing called proof of space and time. And so proof of space is the actual space on your hard drives. there's another thing in the Chia network called time lords, and these do this thing called a verifiable delay function. And when a farmer makes a block and on the proof of space, the time lord actually stamps it with the verifiable delay function, and it goes along the way. And yeah, in this, sorry, let me rewind a sec. So where were we? The question was, sorry. Question was on question was on tape. I got distracted. Okay, so the way that this happens, there's a signage point every 10 seconds, and there's basically twice as many signage points as there are reward block time slots. And basically, the way it works is if you get a challenge, you have, we'll just say like 20 to 30 seconds to respond to that challenge. If you go, so when you get that challenge, you have to go every plot that you have on your disk. You have a 1 in 512 chance of it passing what's called a plot filter. If that plot passes the 1 in 512 chance of passing the plot filter, then you actually do 7 reads on that disk, and then you can hash those together and say, okay, do I form a valid proof? If you do, you have to read all of the entries in table 1, which is like 64 reads, and then you send that back to the host. And if you send that back to the network, and then you say, I have a valid proof, you win 2 Chia as a reward. Now you have to do this under 30 seconds. And so if you have a hard drive that's like totally fragmented and you're writing data to it and you're on this like NAS file systems, by the way, we found out like NAS file systems don't like thousands of 100 gigabyte files, by the way. Like we totally broke a bunch of NAS file systems. And so you're already kind of at that limit with hard drives where like if you have a hard drive in the worst case, like you're kind of already at risk of like not getting the challenge in on time. And so that 30 seconds is enough to basically dissuade anybody from using tape, because on tape you have to do the lookups so often or frequently. You're not reading very much data. You're only reading a few bytes of data every time you do these lookups. But you're doing it so frequently that it would not work on tape. And so today the only mediums you can farm on are basically hard drives and SSDs. Hard drives have the lowest dollar per terabyte today, and so typically people are buying hard drives as their farming hardware. Now, the ideal drive for Chia farming actually is a consumer NVMe drive, which is kind of counterintuitive because consumer NVMe drives basically take almost zero idle power. They take about 5 milliwatts idle power, and they can resume from a zero or near zero idle power state in 5 milliseconds. And so you can, if a challenge came in, you could respond to it and then go back to sleep. This is the same thing as what happens on your phone or your laptop all day. They get good battery life. The SSD wakes up, does some IOs, and goes back to sleep. So in the future, we may see like really big consumer SSDs with like really crappy NAND, because farming, unlike plotting, where plotting you need very good SSD quality and endurance, for the NAND. Farming is the exact opposite. You want like the worst NAND or worst media possible, because all you care about is cost. And the really interesting thing about farming that is it's going to create this brand new market for Chia is in farming, you don't necessarily care about the data integrity of the drive. Like if you have user data on your drive, you want to back that up. You have RAID, you have backup, you have in a NAS, you may have a RAID 5 or something like that, or a mirror. In Chia, you don't want that, because anything that's eating into your expected value will just be negative ROI in the long term, versus just using it to farm. And then if you have a drive failure, you can recreate those plots with brand new plots on your plotting system. So, I think this will be interesting to see what happens over time. Of what kind of new hardware emerges, but I think that there's some optimizations around current hardware and SSD technology that will make it very interesting for farming.
So we've seen some. I don't know how you respond to this, but we've seen some since we started writing about Chia a lot on Tom's Hardware. We've gotten some pushback from our audience. Some people obviously are very very interested in crypto, and then other people are concerned. They kind of blame Chia for what they perceive as, hey, maybe there's going to be some shortages when I want to buy an SSD for my gaming rig. How do you respond to that? Is that something that you see as a serious problem?
So let me respond to. I'm a enthusiast gamer too, right? I had a really hell of a time getting a new graphics card. I have a 3060 Ti that I had to buy from some dude on Craigslist because I tried and failed to buy one from Best Buy and Newegg and Amazon and everywhere. Like I tried for 2 weeks to get a freaking graphics card, and I couldn't get one. So I finally caved and just bought one on Craigslist. But so I understand that concern, right? It's a totally valid concern. Now the demand for SSDs, should be kind of shorter term, because once somebody buys their plotting hardware and they buy the right hardware, they can plot for a very long time, for years, before having to replace that hardware. And so In farming hardware, you buy your hard drives. People are, the cool thing about Chia is you can run those plots. We think maybe for 5 years, but maybe even 10 years, and so you could even transfer them to drive at some point later in time. So in the short term, I can't do anything about there's free market economics. The coin price has launched higher than we anticipated, and that drove up the net space growth because people were like trying to arbitrage it, basically saying, oh, if I buy new hard drives today, I can get a 10x return. And it's a very rational market thing to do. And now that we're seeing the net space get so high, we've exhausted all the hard drives and like the kind of retail channel space that are high capacity. Then we're starting to see over provisioned capacity come online from other places. And once enterprises and other big companies start going in here, it may become very unprofitable for people to go rush out to buy a new hard drive at list price. And so the hard drive thing is one thing where I think that the increased demand is, if the price for Chia keeps going up, there may be some increased demand for hard drives, and that's just now the good thing is that actually benefits the SSD vendors, where the idea is that SSDs were going down in price every year, much faster than hard drives were, and at some point, right, we already got to a point, right, where a 512 gigabyte SSD is cheaper than the cheapest hard drive, which is why they're in Xboxes and PS5s, because an SSD is actually now cheaper than a hard drive. And so it's hard for people to think about this, but fast forward like 5 years from now, when an average capacity SSD is like 8 terabytes or something, you're just going to have so much more capacity than you actually need. Like, it's very unlikely that an average consumer is going to just magically need 10 times the amount of capacity that they need today in 5 years from now. But that's the direction NAND is going. It's the capacity per drive is getting is going way up in the enterprise. So so that's a long way of saying hard drives. Look, I can't control what's going on in the market. As long as it's profitable to farm Chia, people may be buying new hardware, and I don't know how long that will last, whether it's 3 months, 6 months. But at some point in time, it becomes unprofitable for people to rush out and buy new hardware, and things will start going back to normal. In the SSD space, the SSDs are really, what we're seeing is really a shock from just the retail channel space, because typically people weren't buying these high capacity NVMe's with high TBW, and in the retail space, they weren't buying these enterprise drives because nobody in the retail space on Amazon or Newegg bought these enterprise SSDs. And so it's not surprising that they sold out fast. There's actually plenty of drives. And so we will probably see those replenished very quickly. Now, if there is a other shortage on the SSD market, like there is a industry-wide undersupply for NAND, remember, NAND is very interesting because, like, when the iPhone switched, I can't remember, from like 64 gigabytes to 56 or whatever for the base, one of the bases, like, that just drove up like the NAND demand a couple percent. And in that market, a couple percent undersupply means like, prices go up 10 to 15%. And if you're oversupplied, the price in 2019, we saw NAND oversupply by about 3 or 4%, and the prices plunged 30%. And so the NAND market is very, very sensitive to this supply demand thing. And so, yeah, it's hard to say. I can't say what the phone market's going to happen, or the memory market, or whatever, these other markets. But I can tell you that the demand for data center SSDs has already been pretty strong this year. And but yeah, I actually do not see a long-term impact, for SSD supply, for Chia. I think that's a very ephemeral thing.
Person says, are my chances dropping down daily considering that the network is growing rapidly?
Yeah, absolutely right. Your probability is just your capacity over the net space. It's just a simple division. And as the net space grows and your farming capacity does not, then your probability of winning goes down. Remember, and this is a pain. I know everybody's going to be like, get out their pitchforks, for the pooling thing I mentioned. But the pooling thing is going to be very nice because you're going to be able to take your capacity, put it in a pool, and you can earn exactly the rewards that you want to get for your expected value per day. Now, because they thought we had a lot longer to implement the pooling protocol, like, you may have to actually have a different plot format. And the reason they did this is so that they can be able to switch pools very easily. With the current plot format, you'd have to give your total dedication of your total hardware to this pool forever. And we thought that was a terrible thing, right? As a team, we thought that was not going to be a nice thing for pooling, because people want to be able to have that freedom to change pools when they decide one day, I hate this pool, I'm going to go use another pool. And so there will be some replotting required to join a pool, and that's coming in about a week or two. And so, yeah, the team, Bram and the team, are going to do a webcast on, I think, Monday on pools and all things pools. So we're going to see a huge market of pools. The thing to remember about Chia is it's brand new, right? The entire network's been on mainnet for like about 2 months, maybe 2 months and 1 week. So yeah, still very early. So don't worry. All these things that are going to be built on top of the Chia ecosystem are definitely coming.
Alex asks if he will need to replot to join official pools.
Well, Alex, your family is adorable, and unfortunately, I have bad news for you, and the answer is yes. um, yeah, and so I mentioned, the reason why we chose the route of like having to replot for pools because so you could actually switch pools later in time, and that would be kind of the desired behavior for people that when we surveyed on desired behavior for pooling protocols. So.
Cool.
So that could actually slow down demand. I mean, if they have to all redo it, right? I mean, if they have a bunch of capacity and they have to switch it over, right?
Yeah, for sure. The other thing is that like, okay, if you're these people that have like, just say one hard drive laying around or 5 terabytes, and they're saying, well, if I plot it today, there's like 0% chance to win anything, so that's not going to be useful. But in the pooling protocol, they might just say that's worth it. So we may see an increase in that space. We may see it flatten out. I've stopped making guesses because I was just so tremendously wrong and of like how fast the network would grow. So I am. The whole point is that I can't remember. We have some metrics. There's on Chia Explorer. There's some metrics about unique addresses, and we've done these node crawls. In Bitcoin, I think there's somewhere between 70 and 80,000 full nodes out there in the world that are running an actual full copy of the Bitcoin software, that have a copy of the blockchain and are participating in the network. Chia is only 2 months old and has almost 3 times that, maybe more. And it's easy, right? Anybody that just double click the software and installed it on their desktop, they're actually running a full node of the blockchain. They don't know it, but they're part of a completely decentralized cryptocurrency that any, Chia the company could be wiped off the map tomorrow, and Chia the protocol will still keep chugging along. And I think most people know that Bram Cohen, the CEO of Chia and creator of Chia, is most famous for inventing BitTorrent. BitTorrent is largely unchanged from 20 years ago, and it still works perfectly fine, like completely, just as designed. So, every day I'm just more amazed at how awesome Chia is, just so well thought out and meticulous about solving all the challenges about the other cryptocurrencies, got screwed up over the last decade.
So do you see Chia? I mean, one of the things that's happened in some of these spaces is, getting adoption, right? Like I think Tesla was taking Bitcoin for payments and then they stopped. Do you foresee people being able to use Chia in more places, or do you see it primarily being traded for other currency?
I tweeted back at Elon with no avail. Actually, but it's kind of funny. I think somebody who knows him sent him my picture. I wrote a website that kind of calculates the power of the Chia network to kind of show that it's more energy efficient than Bitcoin and stuff. So I was tweeting a picture of that to Elon. So the goal of Chia is actually to create a usable cryptocurrency that is actually used as real currency. And so the approach that they took, and if you want to know more about Chia the company and what we actually have done on the actual business side, there's a business white paper that's available on chia.net as a download. That goes into like the strategy of what the company's going to do, our vision for green money, for decentralized payments, for asset swapping and collateralization on the blockchain, for the smart contracts and programming language, like all these really cool things. So they give a couple cool examples of just applications that are kind of like quality of life wallet stuff that can be built on top of the Chia blockchain, with the Chia-less programming model. And so that would be the idea, right? The other thing is that now that hundreds of thousands of people, I think maybe even 300,000 people, I have to go look at the numbers, have the software on their desktop and they're actually familiar with it. This is like a full node software. And so these people are going to be able to download, soon to be able to download like a mobile wallet that doesn't need a full node to connect and all this stuff. And, it's cool. The people that have 2 Chia or whatever, just one a single block reward, there'll be this new really robust ecosystem to create payments on top of that. And people can transfer money on the blockchain and swap tokens and coins for different types of colored coins. there's lots of decentralized exchanges that will exist for Chia. All this stuff will be built. It's very early, and so it's just a matter of time before these things get built. But that's certainly the vision for the company. It's not going to be like a Bitcoin thing where it's just like, park the Bitcoin and never move it kind of thing.
I think you're muted, Aver.
I just didn't want you to hear any of the noise outside. Anyway, I want to thank you for giving us so much of your time, Jonmichael. Where's the best place for people to go to learn more about Chia?
Chia.net is the main website. I actually was, we have a little media website called ChiaDecentral.com that has like hardware reviews and like, me just basically tinkering with desktops and SSDs. And I have a very poorly filmed YouTube channel that I do zero editing on, and so on YouTube it's very bad. At some point we'll have more time to make some videos, but most of the time I mentioned it has been spent talking to the storage vendors and hypothesizing about what's going to happen to the market here in the next 6 months, as we just talked about today. Chia.net's the best place to find us.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone who tuned in. We are here every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we will see you all next week. Bye, everyone.